votre propre sécurité, Edward Snowden, est assurée?
My security is great. I live a fairly normal life, only I work much harder than I previously did. I put a lot of time and effort toward areas of research now in making us more secure globally, and working with the technical and scientific communities on that regard as to how we can improve the standards that protect our communications around the world, as well as now in activism and advocacy, which is new to me.
Edward, we lost your sound. We can't hear you.
Est-ce qu'on a pu rétablir la
Okay, can you hear me now?
ligne?
You still have no audio.
Auditorium in our place. You can hear us apparently.
I can hear you perfectly.
You can hear.
Yes, I can hear you. You can't hear me.
You can hear me. I can see your lips moving, but I can't.
Right.
C'est bon ou pas? Est-ce que Edouard nous entend à nouveau? Et est-ce que nous pourrons l'entendre?
Is the audio feed still out?
Can you try to say a few words, perhaps?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, great. It's okay. So, heureux qu'on puisse s'entendre et se parler à nouveau. Alors, j'aimerais que vous nous redisiez ce qu'il en est de votre sécurité, puisqu'on ne vous a pas entendu au moment où vous donniez la réponse. Vous-même, vous êtes aujourd'hui... comment dire, vous êtes quelqu'un qui a peur, ou vous êtes aujourd'hui relativement au calme et aussi serein qu'on puisse l'être?
I must apologize. I'm still hearing the French and not the English due to the audio leveling. But let me try to answer that as best I can. It sounded as though the question was about my personal security.
Yeah, that's it.
And I'm doing quite well. I'm doing fine. I live an ordinary life. I ride the Moscow Underground like everybody else when I go about day to day. The only difference between my life before and now is obviously I'm not living in my home. I'm not able to return. And I spend much more time working than I did previously. I spend a lot of time working with the research communities, particularly the technical side of internet standards, to talk about how we can improve the security for everyone around the world, regardless of what national laws they live under. Beyond that, I also do a lot of work with activism and advocacy, which is quite new to me because previously I was part of the structure of government. And now to be on the outside trying to reform government is a very different change in perspective, but it's actually very fulfilling and I enjoy the work very much.
Qu'est-ce qui a changé depuis vos révélations, depuis le travail que vous avez fait comme lanceur d'alerte? Qu'est-ce qui a changé, si quelque chose a changé, dans la structure même du renseignement américain et dans sa capacité à organiser une surveillance globale de tout le monde, pour le dire vite?
So the question sounds as though it's about what has changed.
Yep.
And what I've seen that's changed in the time since I came forward was public opinion and public awareness has changed dramatically around the world, in every country, in every climate, in every time zone. And this is significant because I didn't want to change the world. I didn't want to change the policies of my government. I simply believe that within a representative democracy, our officials are elected to represent the people, not a particular institution, not a particular class, but the public broadly. And they can only do so on the basis of our votes, on the basis of what we believe in, what the values of, as a society are that we hold. And when programs and operations and institutions of government begin to happen increasingly in secret, we begin to divorce ourselves from the operations of government. We begin to be shut out from the very nature of understanding our society and being able to cast informed votes. Because ultimately, when it comes to democracy, The consent, or the government, is founded on the idea of the consent of the governed. Its legitimacy is drawn from the idea that we, the people, direct its operations when we cast our votes. If we don't understand the broad policies and powers and programs that they claim to be within their domain, and the directions that they take in their relations with the world, that which they do against us and that which they do in our name, we are no longer partners to government. We become subjects of government. And I think that's something that the public deserves to know about. Now, since we have begun to understand this, and it has been a fairly broad change, I've seen a study done recently in Canada. It broadly took a look at internet users around the world. And from a representative sample, they found that 60% of the 3 billion internet users around the world have heard about the revelations of last year. And of those, 40% of them have taken changes around the world to make their life more secure. That's roughly 702 million people, individual citizens of different nationalities, who are now more secure and better protected in their communications, in their political expressions, in their personal reading habits, and their associations with friends around the world.
But are you really sure, Edward, that something changed in our minds? Because a few of us journalists, for example, or here in Amnesty International, could think that the monitoring was huge. You proved that it was huge. But where do you see the people empowerment?
So the beginning is the change in mindset.
What about the change of scale?
Right. So this is where we're getting. This is a long and complex answer, but the idea is that when people understand things, things begin to change slowly, politically, over time. Nothing changes over the course of a month. Nothing changes over the course of a year. But we see increasingly within the European Union, the United States, and other places that courts are also beginning to question these programs. We have in the European Union, the European Court of Justice struck down the Data Retention Directive. In the United States, the president appointed 2 panels to look at these programs and say, are they necessary, are they proportionate, and are they effective? Do they work? And every time these programs have been reviewed, we have in fact found that they never stopped a single imminent terrorist attack. And what this provides is a platform, a foundation for us to more credibly review the value of these programs and the costs that they impose on society, and to be able to decide, do we really want to sacrifice this great measure of our rights, this great measure of our privacy, of our liberty, to look at books, to associate with friends, without having it intercepted, recorded, and analyzed in secret and held for longer and longer periods of time. And what I can say is, while we still live under this today, and it has in fact grown and gotten worse in many countries in the Western world, including the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom in particular, we also see it beginning to be challenged. And I very strongly believe that once this challenge begins, over the span of history, over the span of the next decade, we will win. Because people will not accept a world in which everything we do is judged, regardless of the rightfulness or the wrongfulness of that action. The problem is not that the government is investigating terrorists. The problem is not that we are concerned for national security and we want to monitor some foreign military. The problem is when we invent and put into place technological systems that watch entire populations rather than individual suspects. Today, that is the nature of these programs. They cannot operate today as they're employed without intercepting everyone's communications. They do not have a selective interception capability as of today. And this is also the case within France.
What's the problem for you, Edward? You have been a spy. We can say things like that. You have been a spy, so you used to think, I guess, that it was quite normal to have surveillance in the war against terror. So what's the problem? Is it the fact to have this surveillance? Excuse me, my English really sucks. Or is it the fact that it's in such a great proportion or disproportion? You see what I mean? I hope.
I do, and this is the challenge. The departure of the last decade in the way intelligence agencies within the United States and outside it have applied their surveillance authorities is they have moved from a targeted basis of investigation, which is I, the intelligence analyst sitting in Hawaii, have some reasonable suspicion that this individual is involved in wrongdoing. They're a computer hacker targeting nuclear power plants. They're an agent of a foreign government trying to break into an embassy's email accounts, or they're a terrorist looking to cause violence. I would use this as the seat of my investigation. I would go out and I would compromise their systems of communication, the ones that are used exclusively by them, their cellular phone, their computer. This has changed over the last decade in the wake of 9/11 in the United States to what is an untargeted bulk collection program, as the government calls it. Civil society refers to this as mass surveillance rather than bulk collection. But even if we accept the term bulk collection at its face, what it implies is that rather than intercepting only the communications of those who are suspected of wrongdoing, we are now collecting in bulk the whole of everyone in society's communications. And then we are applying algorithms. We are applying selectors, as we call them, to the massive, what they call haystack of an entire population's communications, which is making decisions about who they are, what they're doing, and how the government feels about their behavior. We've seen instances reported in the last year, for example, the Huffington Post, where the National Security Agency of the United States has monitored the pornography viewing habits of people whose political views it considered extreme or radical, but who were known to be unassociated with actual violence. They were treating these people as terrorists, as people who had to be discredited, and using their private lives, their sexual activities, their associations to discredit them in public on the basis of the political views that they hold. And we've seen increasingly over the last year, and particularly just yesterday with the release of the torture report, that when we begin changing our values in secret, when we begin changing the nature of the activities of secret organizations, of state security bureaus, without any public accountability, it leads to a slippery slope where even if they intend to do things for good purposes to what they consider necessary ends, over the span of a very few years, we find ordinary and innocent individuals have been treated in terrible ways as a result of this problem.
You used to work at the NSA. There is also the CIA. And yesterday was released a document on CIA's. Are you still here?
I am here. Yes.
Okay.
The torture program.
Yeah, the torture program. What is your reaction when you read all these pages? 500 were released. 6,000 are the basis. What was your reaction when you learned about the torture policy?
I worked at the CIA as an actual officer of the government during the closing years of the torture and rendition program. I was not personally involved with it, but many people in the agency, they talk about the concerns they have about these programs. So I had my own suspicions, and of course I was aware of what had been alleged in the press. But the Senate investigation and the report that they have released is extraordinary for a number of reasons. I could not help but be deeply saddened and to a great extent angered by what I read. The things that we did as a result of this program are inexcusable crimes. And what we see that is, I think, quite dangerous in the United States debate that is happening literally today, right now, on news channels and newspapers, is that proponents of the torture program are saying that even though There are international obligations to prosecute these because they are serious crimes. Torture cannot be justified. Under international law, it simply cannot be justified on the basis of emergency circumstances or the orders of higher government officials. That does not excuse you from culpability of crime. And yet we see this being argued as precisely that case, which threatens to overturn the standards that we set at the Nuremberg trials in World War II. And this is deeply corrosive, not just to the moral authority of the United States and the West more broadly, but the standard rule of law as applied around the world. If the United States can allow its officials to torture and not hold them to account, what does this mean for much more authoritarian states? What does this mean for governments in Asia, in Africa, and elsewhere around the world? If we can run a rendition, a kidnapping, a detention program, a torture program, keep it secret for years, and then when it is revealed, hold no one to account, what does this mean for the future direction of our society, for the rule of law, for the accountability of senior officials? How can we hold the smallest officials in government to account of the law if we are willing to make broad exceptions for the most senior officials in government? And when we talk about what we saw in these programs, we saw individuals who actually lost their lives as a result of detention, as a result of the treatment that they received under the torture program, and the fact that individuals actually lost their lives. They died after being chained to a concrete floor in an unheated room, half naked. And rather than having the officer who ordered that behavior be prosecuted, he actually received a monetary bonus from the Central Intelligence Agency of $2,500. These are things that leave a stain on the moral authority of the United States government. And if we do not prosecute them, we not investigate them and hold them to account, we cannot move forward as a society.
Edward, the senators did the job, not a whistleblower. Is it a good news for American democracy?
I would actually argue that it's quite sad news, because within the report, which I understand is quite long, so the media has not necessarily read and digested all of it, there actually were whistleblowers who sought to come forward and reveal this behavior, and they failed. We see medical officers who said that these were extraordinary ways of applying procedures in ways that were not medically necessary, and yet they did forced feedings through men's rectums. We saw, obviously, the application of torture techniques such as waterboarding, of applied hypothermia, of sleep deprivation for 180 hours. Individuals who viewed the torture were demoralized by it. They thought it was wrong, and they shared these views with their colleagues. And you will see in the third bullet point that there were people who were even moved to the point of tears. There were people who, in the fourth point, indicated that they would leave these sites and would not serve there because they were opposed to the programs. And we saw people in the sixth point who, when they saw the video, they lost faith in the very mission that they had. But ultimately, you're right. The program did not end despite these protests. And we have to ask ourselves why. Why, despite the knowledge of all of these individuals who disapproved of the programs, who resisted the programs, did they not stop? And the report actually provides an answer to that. And we see within that the leadership of the Central Intelligence Agency was contacted by these individuals, by these officers who protested, who had broken down in tears, who said that these programs probably were not legal. And they questioned not only the legality of these programs, but the effectiveness of them. And the highest official in the CIA's counterterrorism apparatus, Jose Rodriguez, sent official reports. They put this in writing, which is what the Senate reported on, saying that these questions, these concerns, these protests from officers of the government who said this is not legal, this is wrong, this will come back to cause problems for us in the future, he said such language is not helpful. And he demanded that they stop placing this in official channels. The reason that this program did not stop is not because officers within the Central Intelligence Agency were not aware that it was wrong. They knew. It was because the public was not aware that it was wrong. This program stopped not when CIA officers protested within the agency. This program stopped when newspapers told the public of what we had done in secret without the awareness of the public.
So despite the senator's work, you still believe the United States are in a deep moral crisis?
I do. I think the Senate's report is a strong step forward in terms of acknowledging the reality of what we had done. But this does nothing in terms of holding the officials who ordered this behavior and the officers who actually directly engaged in torture themselves to account for what is criminal behavior. If we can argue that torture is justified, if these serious crimes are justified in this circumstance or that circumstance because they have a positive effect, if we could say torture helped here so it's okay, what could we not justify? I mean, how different is torture in terms of the horror of the crime in regards to assault or rape? A government could say that rape has a positive effect because we have a declining demographic crisis in the country. Therefore, it helps us. Efficiency is not an argument for criminal behavior. Efficiency has no place in the debate about right and wrong of torture. And we must not accept efficiency as a justification for the criminal activity that occurred within the last decade.
It's the first time you speak in France. What do you know about us? What have you got in your USB devices?
So I don't have access to any classified information anymore. I destroyed my own access in the wake of Hong Kong. Everything had been provided to the journalists to perform the work. So I can't break news. That's the role of the press. That's not the role of myself as a whistleblower. However, what I can say is what's already been revealed, which is that mass surveillance is happening in every country that can afford a modern signals intelligence agency. Within France, we have seen reporting, I believe by Le Monde, that found that Orange Telecom was providing the communications of French citizens and, of course, those around the world whose communications transit France, to the DGSC. And when this is happening without the awareness of the public as to what the authorities are, the policies are, how they're being applied, and what protections are in place, this is incredibly dangerous. And even if they say this is good or this is helpful in this way or that way, we have to question quite seriously, even if it has some value, for example, like torture, even if it could help us in one case, is it right? Is it morally allowable to violate the rights of an entire population or even a single individual for some small, moderate good? And I think this is a serious question that has not been properly debated in France.
But so you don't have any scoop on Paris or on France? No, it doesn't matter.
Individual for some small, moderate good. And I think this is a serious question that has not been properly debated in France.
But so you don't have any scoop on Paris or on France? No, it doesn't matter. Do you think Europe is or should be or could be based on other rules than those you denounced in the United States?
I think we see the beginnings of a framework, the broad outlines of a way that we can look at investigations, intelligence gathering, and the protection of individual rights in the future, beginning in Europe, with concerns about data protection, transfer, and how we handle this. The most important point is we need international standards of behavior that say what is and is not allowable. For example, it was reported last year that the United Kingdom's GCHQ hacked the Belgian telecommunications provider Belgacom. And they provided themselves access in contravention to not only Belgian national law, but international law, to all of the communications that were being handled by this provider. And this is a very dangerous thing, because suddenly you have EU member states performing cyber attacks, exploitation on other EU member states. And when this is happening and there is no way of managing it, no recourse, no legal challenges, all of the other member states within the EU will suddenly be doing the same thing, because they will perceive a national advantage. And eventually, when you have enough people attacking the same infrastructure, something will go wrong and that infrastructure will fail. The telecommunications provider will go dark. It will go off the air. A hospital system that is being searched for patient information will experience a failure. They won't be able to figure out what a patient is allergic to. And this will have real life costs. And these things have happened in the past, and they will happen again in the future. By forcing the courts to scrutinize these programs and go, is this something that we can allow in a stable society? Is this something that governments can even claim as an authority? Sort of powers of total war, but applied in times of relative peace. We see a way in which civil society can take back the reins of the direction of our society and say that, yes, it is plausible, it is even possible to imagine where mass surveillance may be helpful, but there is no evidence that this has ever been the case despite 10 years of operation. It did not stop, despite its operations, the bombings in Madrid. It did not stop the bombings in London. It did not stop the Boston Marathon bombings in the United States, despite the expenditure of billions of dollars and untold amounts of man-hours at all of these agencies. What could we better apply these resources to that would not only not cost us parts of our rights, parts of our privacy, parts of our liberty and self-determination, but would actually benefit our society, would provide us safer societies, would provide us more research, would provide us greater economic gain, if rather than applying wartime powers to the arms industry, the cyber arms industry, could we instead apply these resources in a more socially responsible and beneficial way? And I think we're seeing that we can.
Nous arrivons, the interview is coming to an end. Edward, last question. In which country would you love to live now?
It would have to be my home. I mean, I would love to go back to the United States. That's always my goal. However, I would, of course, love to come to Western Europe as well. And I would say this is a critical point that we touched upon earlier. We talked about the torture report released yesterday, which has inflamed passions around the world, because we see that a government that should know better, a liberal society that should never authorize these programs, has done so. And we did not know what happened. We had no proof that it happened. And now, when we do have proof that it happened, the Justice Department of this country has said that it will not seek to prosecute and hold accountable those who committed this crime. But the report also tells us that individuals did believe these programs were wrong. They did know that they had a moral obligation to resist, and they tried to do so within the system, and that it failed. It is critical that we provide whistleblower protections, whether within our countries, within the United States, or in countries like France that recognize and protect the value of human rights, who can say, if, regardless of what country you hail from, regardless of whether it was China or Russia or even the United States, if you reveal evidence of serious wrongdoing, we will help you correct these problems, and we will protect you against unjustified retaliation.
Welcome in France, Edward.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very, very, very much.
Thank you very much in the name of Amnesty International. And we will continue to fight and to campaign for you to to be able to go back home free. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.